Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Adrenal Fatigue podcast. It's Danielle here today, and I'm with Angela Rocchio, the co-founder of the Adrenal Recovery Collective, and one of our in-house naturopathic doctors, Dr. Effy Germanis. And so today we're really excited. We're going to have a great conversation about the thyroid and how the thyroid connects to adrenal issues and burnout. And this is something that comes up so often with members of our community. People find themselves wondering, are my thyroid issues exacerbating my adrenal issues, or are my adrenal issues exacerbating my thyroid issues? What do I need to focus on first? How does this relate to one another? And I'm so excited that we can have this conversation together today and shine a light on this topic, because I think the thyroid theme seems a little bit confusing. And it is confusing. There's a lot that goes on there. We're talking about hormones. It's just not always the most simple thing to understand, especially when we're talking how it relates to other issues within the endocrine system. So today we're going to simplify everything as much as we possibly can. It's going to be a fantastic conversation. But before we do, Dr. Effy, would you mind just giving us a quick little bio and telling our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Yes, no, thank you, Danielle. Thank you, Angela. I always love being a part of the Adrenal Collective talks and groups, and the community is just fantastic. I'm always just listening in and watching in. So I'm a naturopathic doctor and acupuncturist, and I practice in Toronto, Ontario. And my main focus in my practice is gut health and pain, so musculoskeletal pain, but pain of the body as well. And a lot of times I do connect with thyroid because I've also been someone dealing with hypothyroidism myself. And it's been an area that's really intrigued me because of its connection, as you said, Danielle, with adrenals, with the gut, or the gut and the thyroid, and the gut and the adrenals. So we just start to see this synergistic connection, whether it's supporting or possibly hampering our approach to healthcare and our health goals. So, as naturopaths, we look at everything from head to toe, but my area of focus is primarily gut and pain, with a little bit of a dabble into the thyroid right now.
Wonderful. Thank
Amazing.
you. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, I think that this is going to be great because I think tying this connection at how the whole body connects, right? It's never just one thing in isolation. So I find it so easy that we're thinking about, oh, I have hyperthyroidism or hypothyroidism or Hashimoto's, any of these different situations, which we're going to talk about in just a minute. And we think about them oftentimes in isolation because that's what we're kind of focusing on with the doctor. And we're not really looking at the big picture of what's going on with the endocrine system as a whole and how does stress play a role into these imbalances. So maybe a great place to start with is just a quick intro to the thyroid, what it does and why it's important, and what happens when it gets thrown out of whack.
Yeah, so the thyroid itself, right? Theros from the Greek term, it's kind of that shield, or you can think of it as a butterfly that sits right in the front of the neck. It's one of our endocrine system organs, pardon me, and it's a part of the bigger system. And so when we think of the thyroid, we think of our main thoughts go to like metabolism. And so, ideally, the thyroid is similar to your hypothalamus pituitary, then you have your thyroid. It's going to be controlling, it's going to be keeping things in check, including your heart rate, your blood pressure, your body temperature. It's all about the conversion of energy, so that metabolic approach, or your metabolism in general. And so thyroid hormones, though, are quite essential for the entirety of the body, for it to function appropriately and optimally. And so a lot of times when we start to see dysfunctions of the thyroid, we see exactly that: changes in blood pressure, changes in heart rate, body temperature, right? And we're going to be talking about the two different types of thyroid dysfunctions in terms of being hyper or hypo, but then also thinking about your metabolism. And so you come into situations with energy and fatigue, or even weight loss or weight gain, again, depending which side of the thyroid dysfunction you're on.
Great. That was very clear. Thank you for explaining that. So why do we see it so much with the adrenal? What's the adrenal thyroid connection, and why do we need to know about this?
So ideally, the connection is that, our whole body is communicating, and these two organs or these two endocrine glands are exactly that. They're both endocrine systems. And so we have our upper level, or kind of our controller, which is going to be at that hypothalamus to the pituitary. Now, we always talk about these two different pathways, which I know you ladies have talked about a lot within the collective group, is the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal, or the HPA axis. We have a similar axis, the hypothalamus pituitary thyroid, or the HPT axis. But a lot of times it's hard to say, even like that chicken and egg, is it an adrenal dysfunction that gives rise to a thyroid dysfunction? Is it a thyroid dysfunction that gives rise to an adrenal? What I've seen in practice is a lot of, the one system is going to support the other system in times of need. And this is where we have that synergistic effect. But again, if we're having metabolic issues, or we're having blood pressure issues, the adrenals, there's two parts of the adrenals, are also controlling blood pressure, and they're also controlling metabolism. So we start to see how these can intricately affect one another, and how both of them can be affected overall when we talk about things like an adrenal dysfunction, like adrenal fatigue, or in a thyroid dysfunction, either hyper or hypothyroidism. So it's kind of that holistic approach. Like, we have to look at the whole body, because there is always that communication. There's that negative feedback that's going to tell the body, hey, we're good on our hormones, or hey, we need some support. There's not enough coming down this way. And so both these endocrine glands are acting in the same way in response to communicating with both the pituitary and the hypothalamus in the brain.
So interesting. So it's probably safe to say, Dr. Effy, that stress, of course, is living with chronic stress, of course, is going to be a burden on our adrenals and can cause some imbalances with the communication along the HPA axis there, the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis. But the same thing, like living with chronic stress, can do the same thing and put a burden on the thyroid in the same but different way along that axis, in the way that the brain is communicating with the thyroid. And these things are interconnected. So stress at the heart of this can be affecting one of these systems more than others. And sometimes it depends on our tendencies, I'm sure. And very much like, is it the chicken or the egg type scenario? It's a hard answer to give a firm answer. It's a hard question to give a firm answer to, but we can kind of come back to looking at the big picture of like, how is stress playing a role in these systems and creating imbalances on both sides of the spectrum.
Yeah, and I think we use the term stress very loosely, because a lot of times, even when my patients hear the word stress, everyone just rolls their eyes. We're like, oh, there's nothing we can do about stress. Like, stress is stress. Excuse me. But yes, that's true. Stress, we're always going to have a stressor, right? And this stressor can be something completely different for every individual. And this is where it's really important, individualized care, is because we have a better understanding who you are and why you're dealing with what you're dealing, understanding your health history, your lifestyle currently, your health goals. All of those play a big role. But that stressor could be something simple as, that the ruminating thoughts, right, about money, or the crisis going on right now, and just worry. It could be something like a deadline at work. It could be a normal stressor on the body, which is a transition phase in our health and wellness, in our age, right? Women go through a normal stressor when they go from a regular cycle into perimenopause, into menopause. So, that stressor is, I think we always want to clarify, because I feel like people just want to say, well, I'm stressed, so therefore I have. It's not always that direct connection, but understanding what you are being exposed to, what your work life is, what your social life is, what your family life is, how do you adapt to your environment is the key part. And sometimes working on those adaptations actually minimizes the stress that we're all going to be exposed to at some time or another, how it affects our health. So I find that a lot of us get down and say, oh, I'm always going to have stress. And so you give up. But if we can work on how you adapt to that stress, that can help you move in the right direction as well.
I love how you brought that up. And I think that, the whole, when people hear stress, they roll their eyes. It's so true. And I love how you talked about it's really important for us to understand that stress, it's, there's a lot of layers there, right? Physical, mental, emotional, spiritual. And these are also things that may be happening now or maybe happened earlier in our lives. A lot of times, right? We talk about a big topic we like to talk about a lot. And I hope to have lots of future podcasts about those, this idea of trauma and how there are different levels of trauma, right? And things we grew up with that we thought were pretty normal, that not necessarily normal or supportive for a good, healthy childhood and a good, healthy balance of life and dealing with certain things, right? Were people around you anxious? Did you have, I'm reading this book on trauma right now and realizing how many people deal with traumas at such a young age. I mean, 1 in 4 to 5 Americans have been, sexually abused. And there is just, when you look at the numbers, it's crazy to see like how much childhood trauma alone we deal with. Now, this is not all about trauma, so I don't want to stick here too long, but I do want to mention that some people say to us, like, I don't feel like I'm stressed, right? Like, I don't think I have that much going on. And we're like, okay, but if you were really honest with yourself, are there some other things that you have been dealing with that you've kind of just left to the side and kind of pushed away because they're too hard to focus on? Or or the anxious mom, or the whatever it may be, the alcoholic parent, the alcoholic relative, like whatever it may be. There are those things that we know play a role in our lives, leave traces that we don't even really realize. So anyway,
Yeah.
stress is a big
And
thing.
to build onto that, Angela, it's really interesting because a lot of people might say, I didn't have that type of situation where I had this
Right.
physical trauma or abuse, but we have to also realize that our exposures, our habits, we have cultural differentiations. We learn in a different way what's normal, what's not normal. And so trauma could be something you've seen, something you're exposed to, something you've dealt with physically or emotionally yourself. There's a lot of forms of trauma. And so you don't have to be a victim. You don't have to be in any case where it's very traumatic. That's again a very extreme situation. But trauma itself is just our way of understanding our environment, right? I have a fear of water or spiders or anything. And sometimes those fears, it's like, why do I have them? I've never been exposed to a spider bite or a snake bite or lived anywhere where those, just roam, but that fear is always there. So it could be a traumatic event somewhere else, or that was brought on that there's this fear, but you have to be fearful of this thing. And that's
Yeah.
what we learned.
Right. And it's true that, right, when we have those types of traumas, just to take it one step further, is like it leaves the traces and it actually affects our sort of alarm system in our body, right? Like our stress, and that alarm system and our nervous system get affected then, and we kind of carry it even though we don't always realize we're doing it. So, and so maybe that resonates with someone out there, with all the listeners out there in some fashion. But yeah, so let's bring it back to the thyroid, the hyperthyroid, hypothyroid. I think it'd be nice to talk a little bit about, what the difference is. What does that look like? What are the symptoms that people are going to see? If people are still out there, the listeners are wondering, do I have, hypothyroid or hyperthyroid?
Yeah. So in the general, when we think of something hyper, it's overactive. So in a hyperthyroid situation, we have an overactive thyroid gland, meaning it's either ignoring the feedback mechanism. There is no feedback mechanism. It's being inhibited. And so it's just overactive. And it's producing tons of thyroid. It's producing this. So your body goes into overdrive. And we do have a good number of the population that falls into a hyperthyroid state. You can have increased heart rate, increased blood pressure. We get that more extreme, right? If you've ever seen pictures or videos where, the eyes are almost bulging out of their sockets. We're going to get more of those hyper or overactive types of symptoms. People will run more warm. They won't be able to keep weight on, which I know a lot of people would love, but is not a positive state to be in or a good state to be in. A hypothyroid situation is the complete opposite. It's an underactive thyroid, meaning that your system is sluggish. Your body is slow. You're tired all the time. Gaining weight is easy. Losing weight is super hard. You feel cold. Your metabolism has slowed. Your blood pressure is low. Your heart rate is low. Everything just seems harder. And occasionally it's almost like you're trudging through like mud. It's how your body feels. Your body gets swollen and heavy as well, because again, we're going to have this dysregulation that's happening within the cardiovascular system, within the respiratory system, within the immune system. Our immune system can become more weakened. And so that'd be more of a hypo, which we see a lot. It affects mostly women, but it does affect men. And we do see it through generations as well. Now, when it comes to how you kind of look at it, there's tests that, and we'll go into that in a little bit, but those are the main symptoms. But you can see how easy it is to overlap these symptoms with something like hypertension or something like low iron or adrenal issues, both a overactive adrenal gland or underactive adrenal gland. So you can start to see how it gets very confusing to determine truthfully where your symptoms or what your symptoms are a representation of.
Sure.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's a great breakdown, Effy. Thank you so much. So
Yes.
I guess I wanted to tie in a little bit about Hashimoto's, because this is becoming more and more of a issue in our society. And so what is the difference between Hashimoto's, and at what point do you maybe suspect, if you've had thyroid issues for a while, like at what point is it Hashimoto's? If you could just share a little bit about that.
Yeah, so building on the whole thyroid symptomology, right? An overactive thyroid, we said, is hyper, and underactive thyroid is hypo. And what we see are the two extreme situations. So in a hyperthyroid, we can go to a situation like Graves' disease. And in a hypo system or a hypo state, we can go to something, as you said, Danielle, Hashimoto's thyroiditis. So this is, again, both situations are an inflammatory component to the thyroid, in which now we start to see autoimmune changes. And what that means is our body no longer recognizes itself as self and as foreign, in a sense. So this extreme, and this doesn't happen overnight. This is a situation that's not dealt with appropriately, not treated appropriately, or there's just so much happening at once in the system. The body will go depending on the direction it chooses. What we have is the body begins to attack. So the cells begin to become inflamed. And then what is seen is that the thyroid cell and the thyroid hormones that are being made are foreign and are being attacked by the body's immune system. And so you can start to get changes in the actual thyroid gland with nodule formation, in the shape, in the size of it. And then you can get really extreme symptoms. Now, the symptoms can be very similar, and that's where sometimes it can get hard to know. And so lab testing is going to be really important. And so with lab testing, we're looking at thyroid hormone testing, but not just your basic TSH. And so your TSH stands for thyroid stimulating hormone. And this is how we check to see the activity of the thyroid. And it's interesting because it's the way science goes. It likes to confuse people, but we have a range from about 0.5, we'll say on average, to 4. So this is a really big range for the TSH. And ideally, the lower it is, the more hyper your body is, so more active, or the higher the number is, the more hypo. And so our ideal number, usually most practitioners will want it around the 2 level, 2 and under. So between 1 and 2, maybe a little bit less, again, depending your age, your sex, what's going on in your health, what your current situation is in terms of, do you want to get pregnant? Are you dealing with other health issues? So anything above a 2 tends to be seen still as normal up until 4, but a lot of people can start to have symptoms. With Hashimoto's, what we also need to know is the antibodies. And so antibodies are going to tell us, if they're high, that our body is now reacting, and it's creating this autoimmune effect. And so it's really important to get your antibodies tested.
Is that commonly tested, Dr. Effy?
No. So unfortunately, most tests that are done right now usually will include the TSH, and occasionally we will see possibly T3 and T4, which is your active and inactive thyroid hormone. T3 is your active, T4 is your inactive, and your thyroid gland makes both. And you require selenium. It's one of our main minerals that helps you convert. So it's really important that, especially someone dealing with some of those symptoms we pointed out with the thyroid, it's really important. I always run this full panel for my patients because it gives us a picture of what's your TSH like. So where are you on the scale? Are you actually creating active and inactive hormone? What's the ratio? What are their levels? And then you can kind of see, are you having trouble actually converting? Is that where the issue is? Are you having trouble creating? Or are you having kind of a situation where we have antibodies, and if they're high, then they can start to attack our thyroid hormones that will affect our levels. And then the other part of that full thyroid panel is what we call reverse T3. And this is where there is a little bit of a connection to the adrenals here, is if that reverse T3 is in a high state or low state, depending what's going on, usually in a high, that means that stress is converting our usable thyroid into something called reverse T3, which is useless. We can't use it. So it's actually converting it into a form that our body can't use. And so you can start to see how stress may start to affect our levels of thyroid hormone.
So interesting. And I think it just shines a light on why it's so important to just dig a little deeper if you do struggle with thyroid issues and thyroid imbalances, just to have an understanding of the full story. Because if we do know that it's something autoimmune, then we can just come in all the more aggressively with diet and lifestyle things to really try to support the symptoms that you're having and get things under control. And Dr. Effy, let me know if you think this is accurate too, because I've heard sometimes when people find themselves in a situation where every year, or every time they go to the doctor, they get tested again, they're getting put on a higher and higher dose of thyroid medication year after year, but maybe haven't explored the reasons as to why what you're doing isn't really working and why you need a higher dose of medication just to function at an optimal level. Would you say that if a listener in that scenario where you've been upping your dose time after time, that it would be worthwhile to look at the whole autoimmune picture and get the backstory of what's going on so you can really dig deeper into addressing more adequately?
Yeah, I feel that, one thing I'll do, and myself as an example, dealing with currently hypothyroidism, is, having that full picture. Because the other part of this is, yes, you might be on medication and you're not getting the effect that you're feeling. So there might be you want to maybe have a better understanding, investigate a little further. Is it truly the thyroid, or are we looking at some other system that's also affecting the thyroid, like the gut or the adrenals, right? We're going to start to look at the inflammation within the body. But when it comes to, understanding the full picture, most practitioners, especially once you're starting to be put on medications, are going to be doing full panels. They should be doing full panels. It's a simple request to do. Sometimes you maybe need to be referred to an endocrinologist, or you can work with your naturopath or your functional medicine doctor, who can also order the labs for you. But the idea there is to get a better understanding if you're on medication, or if all the things you're doing is not really proving to give you the change in symptoms you expect, then further investigation is needed. Another thing to remember, and it's going to get too complicated right now, we can always go into in the future podcast, is our thyroid can function optimally and make perfect amount of thyroid hormones. We can convert them beautifully, but our cells may not be sensitive to receiving it. So then the problem becomes at the cellular level. And so we need to address in that respect and understand why that's happening. Similar to like insulin sensitivity, our body no longer responds after a certain amount of time that's been exposed to current inflammatory situations or current nourishment deficiencies or whatever else has caused it. We start to get a sensitivity issue as well. And so it's really important. The labs will also direct, because if everything is normal and everything is optimal, which I know, again, people roll their eyes, well, always my labs are normal, but I still don't feel great. Further investigation is warranted into looking at the adrenal system, into looking at the gut, into looking at even higher up, hypothalamus pituitary level in the brain, understanding the full pathway and seeing where are we missing something, where there's a miscommunication further down. So looking at both ends of the path.
This is so helpful. And I feel that first, I'm just so grateful for doctors like you and integrative doctors, because we hear so much about people out there hearing this phrase, and I heard it too when I was struggling with stage 3. It's like, your hormone levels are fine, you're fine, go do your thing or whatever. And here I am, trying to get pregnant for over a year, and I was told my hormone levels are fine. Well, then I did further investigation, and then you're talking about these things like the gut, the cellular level of things, the gut, like there's so many other avenues that we need to explore. And so I just want to say that as just a reminder to those out there that like there's hope, there's lots of answers out there, and like there's doctors who specialize in this stuff, and bringing all the connections together, because it is complicated for sure, but that's why, that's okay. We can lean on the doctors, the integrative doctors, the functional medicine doctors, like yourself, Effy, and it makes me feel so hopeful. It made me feel so hopeful when I was in it. And now I am so grateful that we are able to give this to people out there, this hope.
Yeah. And it's just, I like to use the word hope too, but it's just, we really need to, and it's all about education. It's all about understanding. And there's areas that we don't know, right? I don't know anything in maybe the online world or the business world. I'm not, expert in that region. So I'm always going to seek out people who know that. And so this is where we need to, maybe avoid Dr. Google, who tells us that we have every single disease listed, and seek out someone that you can work with one-on-one. It could be a team. It doesn't have to be one single person. And really understand, because again, the approach that I have, and most holistic practitioners and functional medicine doctors and other naturopaths are going to look at, is the whole system. And this is why my area of focus is the gut, because the gut connects to everything. And so when I start to heal the gut or work on optimizing the gut, we start to see changes happen in thyroid antibodies. I've seen them come down after we heal the gut inflammation. I've seen adrenal functions optimize. I've seen energy change. I've seen better nourishment from the same foods that people were eating. Because people know how to eat for the most part. We can be a little bit, we can slack here and there. We can just get tired of it all. We can try to feel like we're giving up. But if the things you've changed and they're for the better are not providing that relief, it's time to sit down and find out with someone and investigate. And I always love teaching my patients. They're with me. They're like my colleague. Now, the difference is I'm helping them, but they're helping me too, because I'm learning from them. And so I always tell my patient, we're working on this together. I'm not doing anything for you. I'm helping you on your path to wellness.
I love that.
So awesome.
And even I think this conversation, because we're taking a complicated topic and really trying to simplify it, but then there's a part of me that's still like, oh, it still feels complicated. And so I know for some of you out there listening, you're like, oh gosh, like where do I begin? And I think that it's just a reminder, what both of you ladies have said so eloquently. It's just, we really need to take our health into our own hands. And it's not that you need to settle. If the blood work is showing up as fine, but you don't feel fine, then just explore elsewhere. And there's other places that we can look to get more information. And I mean, in the work that we do as part of the Adrenal Recovery Collective, we're an integrative group, right? We have wonderful doctors like you, Dr. Effy, and other amazing functional doctors that we chose specifically because they're so good at putting these puzzle pieces together when things feel complicated, which allows us adrenal types who tend to like really want to control everything and be so involved in everything, which I totally get. Like we totally get it when it comes to your health, but it kind of allows you to just put your hands up for a bit and say, okay, Dr. Effy, take the wheel. Like what are we doing and where do we start? And it just takes so much pressure off of you, because you don't have to spend the hours on the Google forums and the Facebook groups trying to figure this out on your own, trying to determine what's the best supplement for you to take. Like the time and energy that money that people put in trying to figure this out on your own. I think the biggest waster of it all is it can be a waste of time, right? If you're not looking at the proper things. So it's just worth it. Like you said, if you need support with business, you get a business coach. If you need a trainer at the gym to help you get you those results, you get support in that regard. And And same with your health too, right? There's so many different avenues where we can get this different type of support. So if you're out there needing more information, definitely check out the links that we have listed in the show notes. We have some great free classes. Book a free call with one of our coaches just to get a free assessment and kind of gauge where you're at, what the best next step could be. There's tons of support out there for you, and just little reminder that you're not alone. And just if you're feeling frustrated, just take a moment to pause and find somebody you resonate with to just get some support.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And then I guess when it comes to getting clarity, right? So where does one start with this? Once they find a practitioner, people will start wondering about the testing, which you've mentioned a little bit, Dr. Effy, but maybe we could chat about,
is full panel? Yeah, so just like kind of what I said, so we want a full, especially if we're talking about thyroid, if we're thinking possibly, do I have a thyroid dysfunction? Occasionally a lot of practitioners will go, a lot of patients will go to their practitioner, whether it's their medical practitioner, they'll do the basic, yearly blood work. And so we'll get a better idea of your iron levels, your stored iron, your ferritin, your liver enzymes, your lipid profiles, your good fats and bad fats, and your cholesterol. All of those are really important just to kind of understand where your body is at that moment. Now, if you are looking to add on someone in the functional medicine, naturopathic realm, nutrition realm, again, when we're talking about testing specifically, this is where I always access patients' labs, because if they've done just a TSH and that TSH is not optimal, then I can say, no, let's follow this test up with another thyroid full panel. That's going to include your TSH. That's going to include your T4, your inactive thyroid hormone, your T3, your active thyroid hormone, your reverse T3, so the one under stressful situations that tends to change, and then our antibodies. And so that's going to be your anti-TG and your anti-TPOs. And so don't worry about the terms, it's just antibodies, and most practitioners will know. And so that test will specifically tell us what's going on right there in that thyroid, in that neck region. You can afterwards say things look fine. We can test more upper, looking at pituitary function as well as hypothalamus function, or we can test further down and see what's going on down below in terms of, sometimes I like to go into gut testing and look at stool analysis or food sensitivity, or even into your adrenal hormones or sex hormones. Again, it's not about doing every single test. Tests will be specific to each individual depending on their symptoms. And their symptoms are the main piece of the puzzle that tells us what's going on. And so these symptoms can be really important for us to, one, guide treatment protocols, but also guide us towards what are we thinking about that's a possibility, what needs to possibly be ruled out. This is where testing is really important. And how can we now move forward if these are your symptoms? What can we do treatment-wise? So you don't have to worry about doing thousands upon thousands of tests, and you shouldn't be doing that many tests, but more so, again, individualized. But when it comes to the thyroid panel, that's the full panel that should be done if there is any thought that thyroid is heavily involved in your current health concern.
Okay,
great
awesome.
breakdown. Thank you, Effy.
Dr. Effy, before we wrap up, I want to put you on the spot and ask, because I know you have a lot of experience in this, if we were to tell our listeners one thing that they could do, whether it's a dietary or lifestyle thing that they could do today to support their thyroid health, what would be like the top bit of advice that you would give them?
I would say optimize gut health. So I'd go right to the foundations and say optimize gut health. And that could be, one is understanding, the foods they're eating, understanding how they're eating, what they're eating, how they feel with foods, not only physically symptoms, but emotionally, energetically, all of those. And they can work with both you ladies on the nutrition component, right? But healing the gut or optimizing gut function, because the gut itself is exposed to our environmental world or outside world or environment. And so everything we eat, drink, anything we put into our body comes in contact with the gut. So that could be things that good things like, we take a lot of supplements, maybe they're reacting. And there's some non-medicinal ingredients you want to think about. The foods we're eating, choosing organic versus inorganic, choosing processed versus whole foods, right? Making small changes there in terms of food. And then drinks. Are you hydrating enough? Are you drinking enough water for your body size, your expenditure, male versus female? How much coffee you're drinking? Are you drinking other things like alcohol, pop, juices, all of those things that you have complete control of? And it's not to say start to restrict, start to make diet hard, start to make your meals impossible. That's not going to solve anything. It's about realizing the choices you make on a daily, how they're going to affect the internal system. So I would go with optimize the gut first. That would be my take home message there. And it's hard to say anything specific because every person's individual. So that's where they can sit, and each person can sit down and just look at the foods you're eating. What are you missing? Include more of what you're missing first. Don't take anything out. Include more of what you're missing first.
That's such good advice. And I will tell you, it's funny. A lot of people come into our program to balance their hormones and support their adrenals and kind of overcome their burnout. But when we start to dig into some of the symptoms and we check in on digestion, I'm like, oh, so how are things going with digestion? People tell me that they feel bloated all the time. And it's sometimes we get so used to feeling bloated all the time if we've been bloated for a while that we don't even realize how uncomfortable we've been and how whatever's going on in the gut could be influencing everything else, because it does. And so, yeah, that's a great point to kind of wrap.
I'm going to piggyback on that too. It's like, for me, it was not having a daily, too much information, TMI here, but not having a daily bowel movement. I didn't know that it wasn't normal to go almost a week without having a bowel movement. When I was going through this, I was fairly young, and I didn't, people don't talk about this very much. And I didn't talk about it with my primary care physician, and it wasn't this thing. And then I realized like how poor my digestion was. And that was such an important piece in my recovery. And I'm just glad that you brought awareness to that. And I don't want to like put this big thing out there right before we end this, but I think it's just a reminder that you talked about the gut, and we know so much, and it's really popular right now to talk about the brain and the gut connection, right? So even just things like depression, anxiety, those things alone can be a root gut issue. So again, it's a big topic, so we won't go into it today, Effy, but thank you so much for sharing your expertise and sort of the next best step that they can take. And yeah, just know that if you're struggling with those things too, there is a connection with the gut there. So there you go.
Yep, gut absorbs all the nutrients you eat. The gut makes some neurotransmitters important for brain health. It makes some vitamins. It houses our immune system. It's our detoxifier. So if it's inflamed or not moving, right? People need to, if you're eating 2 to 3 meals a day, you should be having 2 to 3 bowel movements a day, right? What you put in should come back out. That's a norm. So we need to get away from thinking, oh, it's normal to be bloated every day. It's normal to have a headache every day. It's normal to have PMS. It's normal to be angry all the day. It's not, right?
It's so just become your normal.
Yeah, and it's not normal. And yes, a lot of people deal with it. You're not the only person. It's about realizing that it should be better. And I've had patients tell me who have had bowel movements every day. They're like, I didn't know I could poop better. I didn't know I could have even better bowel movements. So there's always optimizing. And so, yeah, just like I said, Angela and Danielle, it's all about where I would start is the gut. In terms of anything else, it's the one area that we have full control of in respect to what we're putting in to our system.
I'm truly like a broken record because I keep saying it, but it's all about with these complicated things. And I know when we're talking about hormones and that the brain and our endocrine system, like it can feel so complicated. So I'm always like, let's just come back to the foundations and check those out, because oftentimes there's big red flags and we probably already have some awareness around them. Some of us might just be learning a little bit more about these foundations and why they're actually so important and how they correlate to everything else. But when we start exploring them, we actually know quite a lot, and there's so much that we can do. So it simplifies a really big and complex thing, but that brings me so much peace, and I love sharing that with our clients, that this can be a lot more straightforward and simple than we've probably made it out to be. And all the better if you've got great practitioners to support you with a really good plan.
Yeah, because for some of us, it's like we know what to do, but the next step is the hardest, actually taking that next step, right? So that's why we're here. That's why there's people out there that are willing to support you, right? You talked about that, Effy, that, you know, hiring a coach, hiring someone to support you. So if you know what you need to be doing, but that taking that next step has been hard for you, then, you know, reach out to us or another team. We just want you to get support that you need to get your health back, to get your life back, your energy back, because it can totally happen.
And you're worth it, and you deserve it all.
You deserve it all.
Ladies, thank you so much.
This so fun, Dr. Effy. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I always love our conversations. It's always fun.